I remember being a little girl and hearing them sitting around, all the adults sitting around the kitchen table talking about camp, and the way they told it and the stories, they were laughing and giggling. I thought they went to summer camp. I didn't know at the time, you know, as a little kid, that that was actually a concentration camp or an internment camp. But like my mother tells it, to her, it was kind of, you know, being in the camps and so forth. And my aunt even said it was not a highly unpleasant experience. They made, you know, they made do, and because they were in the same boat, I think, with a lot of other Japanese friends and neighbors and some new friends, you know, that they met in the camps. They could hear the rumors and the brouhaha kind of coming. So they were anticipating it, because it actually happened in California before it hit Seattle area. The Californians were, you know, being moved first because of LA, you know, San Francisco, highly visible trafficked areas and possible targets, whereas Seattle's kind of a small little cow town back then in the day. So they knew it was probably coming, and but still, you know, it was just when it hit, then it was kind of a bit of a shocker, because they thought, well, maybe they'll skip us, but no, they didn't. So my mother's remembrance of it is that just having to put everything in one suitcase and just what they could carry, basically. And they had a neighbor who said, well, I'll, you know, put it in my storage shed and I'll look after it, and when you come back, then you can get it. And that never happened. Anyway, but she talks about the worst part of it for her was being at, you know, where the Puyallup Fair is. Well, they were horse stables or animal stables or whatever, and that's where they put them the first night before the train could come and take them to their next destination. And she remembers the train ride, and she remembers being in those, you know, smelly horse stables. But then when they got to the camps, then it wasn't as bad until winter struck. She talks about the Tule Lake camps especially, and there's actually one that was reconstructed out of materials from Tule Lake at this the Japanese National Museum in LA. We saw it, and to get a feel for what this must have been like. And basically, it's, you know, very thin boards with tar paper, you know, for insulation. And they were hot in the summertime and very cold in the winter. But the government provided, you know, them with medicine and with food. They had a kind of the cafeteria, they called it, you know, but basically like barracks is what they were living in. And but they allowed the people to cook their own food. So my mom said it wasn't that bad. It wasn't like eating powdered eggs or something, you know, sea rations that you get in boot camp or something like that. She said they allowed the cooks to kind of bring in and order some Japanese food, not a lot, but some. So they you know, they didn't starve to death. I mean, it wasn't like the prisoner of war camps in Germany or something like that. They weren't that bad off. My mother said she wouldn't have learned to play the piano had it not been for the war, because she learned to tap dance and play the piano in the camps. The government actually sent in teachers, and Roosevelt, you know, felt that they needed entertainment, so they allowed them to kind of, you know, have these dances and things like that. And that's where I think I got the idea that these were summer camps, because they enjoyed each other and met, you know, you can imagine a group of teenagers mostly, and their parents, you know, being in this big camp. And we have pictures. My sister has all the pictures. I wish I could show you, but they did the Japanese dancing. They had, you know, I don't know how they got them, but they had their kimonos, and they would, you know, carry on some of the traditions. Now, actually, my aunt and my mother, when they became of age, they worked in the hospital. My aunt later on became a doctor, but they asked for volunteers, and they were able to actually be, you know, in the hospitals caring for some of the older, you know, people, or people who were sick, or pregnancies went on, deaths went on, so there was a little hospital. And I think the patients felt more comfortable if they were more surrounded by Japanese caregivers. So my aunt and her sisters, my mother, they got jobs working, you know, for part of the camp. So it was almost like a little village that eventually was established. There were no beatings, they didn't, starve to death, that type of thing. So their memories of camp as, again, teenagers, it wasn't so bad. My dad was actually dating my mother's older sister, and so they knew of the Tamura family. He had, at that time, I think, 4 brothers, 3 brothers, 4 brothers. And kind of a curious thing, the oldest brother, Chuck, was married to what we call Hagujin, or a white woman, and they had a child. And my dad remembers that they had such a rough time because they were getting it from both ends. The Japanese didn't like her or the child, and of course her family didn't care for the Japanese. The war kind of infracted them a little bit. So Chuck was sent to camp, and of course she and the baby could not be in the camp. So she had to move closer and visit. And eventually they settled in Vail, Oregon, which was close to where Minidoka is. So she could see him, while he was in camp. But then all of my dad's brothers volunteered for the armed forces. And then the war ended and they were reunited. But because of that, my dad was adamant that none of his girls were going to marry a Caucasian. And so 2 of us are and 1 of us aren't. My parents both said, thank goodness that Roosevelt protected them in the camps, because the stories they heard when they got out of people who were within that 300-mile border that stayed in the cities like Spokane, life for them was miserable, because not all, but very many Caucasian people were angry, because of how they looked. So, and in fact, in Seattle, the Chinese people took to wearing a sign that said, "I'm Chinese" or "I'm Filipino," because they didn't want to be mistaken for a Japanese person.